Okay, good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night, so it's halacha and Tanya. Last week we were still learning the dinim of tzedakah, giving tzedakah, and family comes first in the midst of giving tzedakah, and tzedakah is a very great thing. Nobody ever becomes broke from it. Brings the geula. It's a relationship with Hashem. When we give tzedakah to other people, Hashem gives us tzedakah, and therefore it says you're supposed to give tzedakah before davening. Okay? The last thing we learned was tzedakah is like a vow. When you make a vow, you have to pay it. You have to do it. So what happens if somebody says this money is for tzedakah? He really should give it right away. If there's no poor person, then he puts it away until he finds a poor person. If it's a donation to an institution, when they ask you for the money, you really have to give it. Okay. Now he says like this. If somebody forces other people to give tzedakah, is also a big mitzvah. Okay. In fact, it's even in certain respect greater than you yourself giving tzedakah, because now you got two people giving tzedakah. And then it says like this. Years ago, they had the Gabbai tzedakah was like this. They used to collect money from people, and they were the ones responsible for giving out the money to people. So a lot of times the poor people wanted more money than they were allotted, and they would curse the Gabbai tzedakah, the guys giving out the money, which were city employees, so to speak, that were in charge of giving out the money for tzedakah. They would curse him. So he says, don't worry about it. In the halacha it says, he quoted really from Shulchan Aruch, that don't worry, the more they curse you, the greater is your merit. Because you're getting a bigger mitzvah, doing a mitzvah, even though people are screaming at you. If they keep thanking you, then there's a little bit of ego involved. But when they yell and scream at you, then you shouldn't worry about it, you get a lot of schus. Okay, now the real din of tzedakah, in fact, the Rambam enumerates a thing like 11 levels of tzedakah. The greatest level of tzedakah is, the expression is, if somebody is slipping, you can catch him easily. But once they fall, it's much harder to pick them up. The same thing is with the concept of tzedakah. If a person becomes broke, it's very hard to get him back on his feet. But if a person is having a hard time in business, is the cash flow or whatever it is, and if you help them out, you can get them back on their feet. That's the biggest level of tzedakah, that a person is able to get somebody else back onto their own feet, and that's a much more respectful way. Either you lend them the money, or you become a partner with them, and so on. And the Torah says, when the Torah speaks about the mitzvah of tzedakah, the Torah says, strengthen him. What does it mean, strengthen him? Make sure he doesn't fall. That's what it means. So now they bring down a very interesting question. The Birkei Yosef, the Chidah, is a very great Sephardic posek, was asked a question like this. A poor man came who gets an X amount of money for tzedakah. Okay? And he says, if you don't give me more money, I'm going to start working on Shabbos. I'm going to start working on Shabbos. He threatens, basically. You don't give me enough money, I'm going to start desecrating Shabbos. So he says over there, you don't need to give him more money. If there's not any money, you're going to be taking away from other poor people. Just because he threatened, it doesn't mean anything. Or you have another case that they quote from an early commentary that Ravid, was a contemporary of the Rambam, that what happens if a poor person is very poor and he's going to sell himself as a slave. And he says before he sells himself as a slave, he says, if you don't give me money to live, I'm going to have to sell myself as a slave. The din is, you don't have to give in. You don't have to threaten the person. Give in to the threats of the person that he's going to desecrate Shabbos, or he's going to sell himself to a guy, or whatever it is. Why? Because halacha is halacha. And what he was allowed to do, you do. And what he's not allowed to do, you don't do. Okay, another thing is like this. The best way of giving tzedakah, and we said that Rambam enumerates many different ways, this way, that way. But the Rambam brings it down. It's truly a Gemara, and that is as follows: the best way of giving tzedakah is you don't know who you're giving it to, and the person doesn't know who he's getting it from. That is really the best way of giving tzedakah. Why is it like that? Because if you know who you're giving tzedakah to, as a human being, down deep in your mind, you're going to say, the guy owes me something. After all, I gave him tzedakah, he's indebted to me a little bit. If you don't know who you're giving it to, then you don't know who's going to be indebted to you. And also, if the poor man doesn't know who he's getting it from, so then he's less embarrassed. And that was called, in the Bais Din, there was called Lishcha Chashoy. There was a secret tzedakah pushka, so to speak, that people would give money into. Nobody saw him giving it. Nobody knew who got the money. And poor people would come and take the money. So therefore, that was like the best way. Nobody knew who gave it. Nobody knew who took it. And that's a very, very great way that that nobody knows, who got it. And another thing it says, you shouldn't brag about giving tzedakah. You shouldn't say, I'm a great person. Look, I'm a big about tzedakah. I'm great by giving tzedakah. Why is that? Like we learned at the beginning, we don't own our own money. Hashem gives us money. We are managers of Hashem's estate. Like the Gemara says, Rebbe, who was super rich, he would honor rich people. And why would he honor rich people? It doesn't make him smarter, better, more religious or nicer people. Why did Rebbe honor rich people? So the Gemara explains, because Rebbe felt if Hashem entrusted this person with a lot of Hashem's portfolio, so to speak, so that person must have a certain schus, a certain merit that, Hashem entrusted him with a lot of money. But a person's attitude in giving tzedakah is, I am not giving my money. I'm giving Hashem's money that Hashem entrusted me to give it. And therefore I have to give X amount, like we learned last time, the various different amounts. So he says a person should not pride himself with giving tzedakah. But he says, what happens if you donate something to a shul? Let's say you donate a building, you donate a siddur, a chumash, whatever. It not only is it permissible, to write your name in it, donated by, and it says the Shulchan says it's fit to do that. Why? Because then people learn from you. People learn from you also to do the same thing. So therefore, it's not a problem if a person calls out a pledge, let's say make an appeal, and there's people calling out a pledge, and they should say, no, I don't want anybody to know what I'm giving. So sometimes that's not good. Why isn't it good? Because if people hear that you're giving that amount of money, that will cause them to give money also, or more money, or whatever it is. So I give you another example. It's brought down in the commentary in Pirkei Avos about 4 levels of tzedakah. Okay? So what happens, you're making the appeal, and the rich man of the city is not giving. He's not calling out. He said, I don't want to, I'm going to give privately. Okay, so the rich man of the city is not responding to the appeal. What happens? The other people in the institution say, 1 minute, the rich man's not giving, why should I give? The rich man's not giving, why should I give? The answer is you should give, because then people will also give. And you don't have to go around bragging that you gave the money. So it says in Shulchan Aruch, you shouldn't be bragging about the mitzvah of giving tzedakah, how much tzedakah you give. Because again, it's not our money, it's Hashem's money, He just entrusted us with giving it. But it's allowed and it's appropriate, halacha says, that if you donate something, your name should be on the building, on the chumash, on the siddur, whatever the person is donating. Another halacha over here is, you have to be very meticulous that on poor scholars, Torah scholars that are very poor, that they should be given respectfully. Not like a regular tzedakah you give somebody. In other words, if he doesn't want to receive tzedakah, you should make a business with him, sell him things, merchandise for cheap that he could sell it and make a living from it, or something like this, or else you give him money. Many times a person, one time had money and then now they need money. Okay, you want to give him money, but sometimes you're embarrassed to take. So we'll soon learn a din that if you need to take tzedakah, you have to take tzedakah. It's a din, you must take tzedakah. But we'll get to that in a minute. So what do you do if the person needs money and he doesn't want to take tzedakah? So you tell him, listen, it's a loan. It's a loan indefinitely. Whenever you have a mitzvah Shem, the wheel of fortune will turn. You'll get more money. You'll pay back the loan. Your mind, you're giving it a tzedakah. You're not expecting him to pay it back. But what you're doing is you're giving it into a more respectful way that it's a loan. I'm not giving you tzedakah that you're, a beggar, so to speak, that's accepting alms from people. So you do it in a more respectful way, or, you work it out in a way. That's the best way of giving tzedakah, that a person shouldn't be embarrassed or, things like that. And next thing is that a person should distance themselves from taking tzedakah. In other words, he should do everything possible that he shouldn't have to take tzedakah. And like it says, and this is a very interesting din. The Alter Rebbe brings this din down at the beginning of Shabbos. It sounds like this. The Gemara asks a question. There's a contradiction between two expressions of Chazal. One Maimer Chazal says about Shabbos. Hashem says, because we know the Gemara says that all the expenses of a person already are destined on Rosh Hashanah, except the expenses of Shabbos and Yom Tov and a few other mitzvahs. So the expenses of Shabbos and Yom Tov, how much you're going to be getting, in the sustenance for the year, how much money Hashem is giving you for the year, does not include the expenses of Shabbos and Yom Tov. You spend more, you're not going to get any less. You're going to have still the same amount. So one Gemara says, Lava alai vani pareya. The beginning of Shabbos, it says, Hashem says, borrow on my account and I'll pay you back. Okay, so one Gemara says, you should borrow money for Shabbos. Another Gemara says, Asay Shabbat chochol, it's preferable to make your Shabbos like a weekday. No special foods, mamish, like a regular weekday, but it's tzadich labrias and not to rely on the people. So the question is, there seemingly is a contradiction. One Maimer Chazal says, borrow, Hashem says, that means rely on other people, borrow money and I'll pay it back. And another Gemara says, I'll say Shabbat chochot the tzadich labrias. It's better to make your Shabbos into a weekday and not have to come and rely on people. So how do you answer this? So the Alter Rebbe brings down the answer, and that is as follows. If somebody has money, but they're low on cash flow, okay, they have money. Now, not that they're poor. They just don't have cash. So then the Gemara says, Lava alive on the pareya. Hashem says, borrow on my account, Hashem says, and I'll pay it back. If somebody has no money whatsoever, so then the Gemara says, I say Shabbat chochel, but it's tzadich labrias. It's better to make your Shabbos into a weekday, meaning no delicacies, 2 meals instead of 3, or whatever it is, that you should rather have to rely on people. Okay? Life. And the Gemara says that even if it means working a very degrading type of a work, so to speak, even if it's a novellas type of a work, nevertheless, he should do it rather than to rely on people. Hashem doesn't like people. So there's two aspects. There's from the giver's perspective and from the receiver's perspective. The giver's perspective has to be, I have to give tzedakah. Okay? And if somebody doesn't want to take, I have to figure out ways that he should be able to take it. Number 2, if somebody comes and asks me for money, poor person, I shouldn't start telling her, hey, why don't you go to work? Go to work. What are you asking me for money for? You look able enough to work. That's not your business. As far as a halacha goes, somebody who asks you money, you must give them. You don't have to give them a lot, but you have to give them something with a smile. We learned before. Because if you give it in a rotten mood, you lose the whole mitzvah. So there's two perspectives. Number one, I want to give tzedakah. I want to help people. And at the same time, I don't judge people. Because if I start judging people, we learned last time, or 2 times ago, then Hashem starts judging us if we're fit for Hashem's tzedakah that he gives us. So we're not supposed to do that, okay? We're not supposed to judge people. That's from the giver's perspective. From the receiver's perspective, it has to be that we should try to avoid taking tzedakah. Nevertheless, it says, by the way, it's not only a Talmud Chacham that we have to give in a respectful way. The poskim write, even a person is Baal Maisin, a person is a good person, does good deeds, even though he's not a scholar, but he's a nice person, he's a community person, he helps people. That person should also be treated with respect in the essence of giving them proper tzedakah. And now the next thing is like this. Whoever is not supposed to be taking tzedakah. No, you don't have to give the same person every week. This comes up, by the way, it's a very interesting shaila, by the way. It says in Shulchan Aruch, we didn't mention it, but it says in Shulchan Aruch, you shouldn't give all your tzedakah to one person. You should spread it out. But if the person is a parent, it says in halacha that the parent needs the money, so then halachically you could give them all the money. Because it's a relative, it's a family member, so then you could give them the order. Generally speaking, and the Rebbe mentioned this a number of times, he wrote about it, it's always good to change amounts that you give. Why? It shouldn't become a neder. It shouldn't become a vow. Because halacha says, and we say this in Hataras Nedarim, at least the men do, when they nullify the vows of Erev Rosh Hashanah. They say, or whatever, and then it says, or any good deed, that I did it 3 times in a row, and I never made a condition that it should be without a vow, so that we're also nullifying. Generally speaking, the Rebbe again wrote in this in answers to people and it's printed already in many places, that people should not do the same thing unless if they start off saying bli neder. Anytime a person does something as a stricter observance, there's a general rule in halacha. They did it 3 times in a row, and they did it because they wanted to be machmir, to be strict. I'll give you an example. I mean, I don't know why this example is falling into my head. Even though the Rebbe writes in the Rebbe's house, they didn't light Shabbos candles with oil; they lit candles, as we know. But in Shulchan Aruch it says it's better to use olive oil for Shabbos candles than regular candles. Okay, it's better to do it. So what happens now? A woman goes and says, "You know what? I'm going to do it." So she did it 3 weeks in a row, and she never said it's going to be bli neder. She just did it 3 times in a row. Halachically, if she wants to stop that custom, she has to be matu neder. She has to go to 3 people and nullify the vow. It's not a vow, but she did it 3 times in a row. That becomes like a vow. So generally speaking, you don't have to give the same money to the same people in tzedakah. The same. You have this. I'll give another example, which is, again, I'm not going to rule this because every case needs to be asked individually. But I'm just throwing out scenarios. A guy promised X amount of money to a shul. Okay? Then he moved out of the neighborhood. He doesn't live there anymore. Or, to speak about shul politics, the guy got into a fight in the shul. So now he's davening in a different shul. So now he doesn't want to give money to that shul anymore. He doesn't daven. But the problem is he made a pledge. So the question is, Can he give it now to his new shul? Or does he have to give it to that shul that he pledged? And then you have a different scenario that comes up. I pledge money to an institution. Let's say I paid part of it. And then the institution closes. It's not there anymore. So I still have a pledge of, let's say, $1,000 to tzedakah, and I paid $500 to that institution. Now the institution closes. So now what do I do? Or another scenario, which happens a lot, and just had this recently, people are collecting money for somebody's wedding. Or God forbid, somebody passed away, the family doesn't have enough money to pay for a burial. So let's say, for argument's sake, it's very expensive to die today, by the way. Nobody should die. It's very expensive to die. Sometimes it's more expensive than to live. So let's say, for argument's sake, you need somebody passed away, family has no money, they need $10,000. Okay, so now they're raising $10,000 for the family. But people are generous and they end up raising $15,000. But you only need $10,000. So what do you do with the leftover money? That was the money pledged to tzedakah. Or another case, wedding, they need $10,000 to the wedding and you got $15,000. So, what do you do with the money? So over there it says, again, every case is a different shilas. I'm not saying this is as a halacha for each of this. Every scenario is a different halacha. But then the case would be, let's say they raise money for a funeral and there's extra money. The money should be set aside for a similar scenario that somebody else passes away and they don't have money. Because what was the money given for? Somebody who died and the family doesn't have enough money to bury him. So at least it's the same, maybe not the same person, but it's the same cause. Or if they raise money for a wedding and they raise miraculously more money than the person needs. So now what do you do with the extra money? You put it away for another wedding of somebody that needs. Or sometimes, again, every case is different. Sometimes they can give the money to let's say they needed 10 and they raised 15 for a wedding. So the leftover money they can give as a gift to the chas and kala to become established, to buy furniture, whatever, scenarios what it be. But every case really is an individual case with different dinim, and every case should be asked individually. So generally speaking, people should try not to do the same amount of tzedakah every day. Even if it's a difference of a nickel, a dime, or whatever it is, just to change it that it's not. Or the best thing would be, when you start giving tzedakah, or even it's never too late. Say from now on, the dollar I give a day, whatever, should be blin neder. And therefore, it's not a vow. And therefore, if I have more, less, it's not a problem. They once asked, there was a person collecting money for tzedakah, for poor people. So they asked him, were you successful? He said 50%. They said, what do you mean 50%? He said, the poor are willing to take, but the rich are not willing to give. So he was 50% successful that the poor people were willing to take, but the rich are not giving. So things like that. Okay, let's just learn this one more din, and then we'll go to Tanya. So it says like this. A person who really doesn't need to get tzedakah, and he fools people, and he takes tzedakah. So the Torah says you're going to die needing to come onto people. You're going to die needing to rely on people. And he says, whoever needs to take and he doesn't, like an old man or a person, and he doesn't take, he's like can murder. So it's called suicide. And mischaye benafshi. Okay? A person that needs money, he's sick and he needs money. If he doesn't take the money, he's going to die. And he doesn't take the money, it's called suicide. He's shefer dam, he's murdering himself. Then it says like this. A person who really needs money, but they don't, and they push themselves through to get by, not that they're sick or dying, whatever. They're just going to push themselves through a little bit to be able to live without, they're going to live more painful or without having to take tzedakah. It says Hashem tells them, you're going to die. Before you die, you're going to be supporting others. That's the merit of a person. If they don't need to take tzedakah, they shouldn't take tzedakah. But if they do need to take tzedakah, they have a biblical obligation to take, and if not, it could be a question of suicide, because the people need the money, and that's what Hashem wants. And Hashem made, it's interesting, just before we go to time, we finished now the laws of tzedakah, so before we start the next laws, I just want to mention this. Life, Hashem made the world, the whole life, by the way, is made up of mashpia and mekabel, giver and receiver. From the second we're born, okay, a person is born, a baby, they're receiving. As they get a little bit older, they give. In business, in teaching, let's say in school, the teacher gives, the students receive. Father gives the seed, the woman receives the seed. Business, you have boss gives, the worker receives. The whole life is set up. The Eibishter made, and tzedakah also is part of this life system. Tzedakah is, there's a giver and there's a receiver, and this is the way Hashem wanted the world to run. Why does it run like that, mashpia mekabel? Because in the ruchnistic, in the spiritual realms, upstairs, in those worlds up there, the whole world system of Atzilus and Bria and Yetzirah and Asiya and all the worlds is mashpia and mekabel, giver and receiver. Yud is the giver, Hey is the receiver, Vav is the giver, Hey is the receiver. There's a Zah is giving, Malchus is receiving. The whole system of the way Hashem set up the world is in the way of mashpia and mekabel. But one thing, we'll finish with this. The Gemara says, Yeser mimasha balabayis oise ima ani, ha'ani oise ima balabayis. The Gemara says, more than what the rich man does for the poor man is what the poor man does for the rich man. That means when you give tzedakah, you have to picture it. You're not doing anybody a favor. You're doing yourself a favor, you're giving tzedakah. So when you give $1 to a poor person, you're giving him $1. Okay. But what the poor person is giving to the rich person is the ability to do a mitzvah that's worth much more than $1. So the Gemara says more than the rich man does for the poor man does for the rich man. Why? Because he's getting him to do a mitzvah. What can be greater than that? Okay, we're going to leave it here. We're going to go to Tanya.